NET presents USA Poetry. This program is devoted to the work of Richard Wilbur and Robert Lowell. The names of Richard Wilbur and Robert Lowell are among the most distinguished in American letters. Both men have been awarded the Pulitzer Prize and many other literary honors. Both poets tend to employ traditional forms with the greatest technical mastery, and both men are scholars and teachers as well as poets. Richard Wilbur, born in New York City in 1921, now lives in Connecticut near Wesleyan University, where he is a...
I suppose I am called a formalist, sometimes in a nice way, sometimes not in a nice way. But I think you simply have to have a disposition to worry about that aspect of the poem, and for some reason that's always been a strong inclination of mine. I'm not, of course, interested in making little doilies, and I don't really feel any specific and dissociated formalistic excitement about any poems, mine or anyone else's. I'm interested in what's being said, but I suppose I'm more interested than many people are in what can be said by way of the formal means. Well, this is my most recent poem, and it's called On the Marginal Way, and you probably recognize the scenery of it. It's the rocky coast of Ogunquit, Maine. Some of the oldest rocks in the country are there, and this is a poem about someone in this time with his head full of this time, looking at the ancient coastal rocks. On the Marginal Way. Another cove of shale, but the beach here is rubbled with strange rock that is sleek, fluent, and taffy pale. I stare, reminded with a little shock how by a shore in Spain George Borrow saw 100 women basking in the raw. They must have looked like this, that catch of bodies on the sand, that strew of rondure, crease, and orifice, lap, flank, and knee. A too abundant view, which, though it had the lenses of a fly, could not have waked desire in Borrow's eye. Has the light altered now? The rocks flush rose, and have the melting shape of bodies fallen anyhow. It is a Jericho of blood and rape, some desert town despoiled, some caravan pillaged, its people murdered to a man, and those who murdered them galloping off, a rumpling line of dust like the waves' white withdrawing hem. But now the vision of a colder lust clears as the wind grows chill and all is grayed by a swift cloud that drags a carrion shade. If these are bodies still, theirs is a death too dead to look asleep, like that of Auschwitz's final kill, poor slaty flesh abandoned in a heap, and then, like sea rocks buried by a wave, bulldozed at last into a common grave. It is not tricks of sense, but the time's fright within me which distracts least fancies into violence and makes my thought take cover in the facts, as now it does, remembering how the bed of layered rock 2 miles above my head hove ages up and broke soundless asunder, when the shrinking skin of earth, blacked out by steam and smoke, gave passage to the muddled fire within, its crannies flooding with a sweat of quartz, and lathered magmas out of deep retorts welled up, as here, to fill with tumbled rock meal, stone fume, lithic spray, the dike's brief chasm and the sill. Weathered until the 6th and human day by sanding winds and water, scuffed and brayed by the slow glacier's heel, these forms were made that now recline and burn, comely as Eve and Adam, near a sea transfigured by the sun's return. And now 3 girls lie golden in the lee of a great arm or thigh, and are as young as the bright boulders that they lie among. Though high above the shore on someone's porch, spread wings of newsprint flap the tidings of some dirty war, it is a perfect day. The waters clap their hands and kindle, and the gull in flight loses himself at moments white in white, and like a breaking thought, joy for a moment floods into the mind, blurting that all things shall be brought to the full state and stature of their kind by what has found the manhood of this stone. May that vast motive wash and wash our own.
Richard Wilbur's published works include The Beautiful Changes and Other Poems, published by Rinal and Hitchcock, 1947, Ceremony and Other Poems, published by Harcourt Brace in 1950, and by the same publisher, Things of This World, 1956, Advice to a Prophet, 1961, and The Poems of Richard Wilbur, 1963.
I work very, very slowly. Sometimes it takes me 3 or 5 years to finish off a poem. I'm not talking about continuous labor, but about putting it up and putting it down and picking it up. In general, it's not formal problems that slow me down. It's thinking, something at which I'm very slow, and it sometimes will hold me up for a year and a half, thinking about some way to make my next point, or some way of discovering what my next point is to be. Here's a poem called Love Calls Us to the Things of This World. The eyes open to a cry of pulleys, and spirited from sleep the astounded soul hangs for a moment bodiless and simple as false dawn. Outside the open window, the morning air is all awash with angels. Some are in bed sheets, some are in blouses, some are in smocks, but truly there they are. Now they are rising together in calm swells of halcyon feeling, filling whatever they wear with the deep joy of their impersonal breathing. Now they are flying in place, conveying the terrible speed of their omnipresence, moving and staying like white water. And now of a sudden they swoon down into so rapt a quiet that nobody seems to be there. The soul shrinks from all that it is about to remember, from the punctual rape of every blessed day, and cries, "Oh, let there be nothing on earth but laundry, nothing but rosy hands in the rising steam, and clear dances done in the sight of heaven." Yet, as the sun acknowledges with a warm look the world's hunks and colors, the soul descends once more in bitter love to accept the waking body, saying now in a changed voice, as the man yawns and rises, "Bring them down from their ruddy gallows. Let there be clean linen for the backs of thieves. Let lovers go fresh and sweet to be undone, and the heaviest nuns walk in a pure floating of dark habits, keeping their difficult balance." I remember when the bomb fell on Hiroshima, a fellow soldier said to me, "I'll bet you can't write a poem about this." And I wouldn't take his bet. I finally discovered an approach that was not only going to say, "Don't drop the bomb," not only going to reflect my fear about it, but would make it a good poem. A poem called Advice to a Prophet, which comes in on the subject through some things that I remember Bertrand Russell saying, and the chairman of the AEC, talking about the likely consequences for plant life and animal life of any large amount of radiation in the atmosphere. Through thinking of the disappearance of carrots and the white-tailed deer and so on, it became possible in some way to approach the enormity of the subject. Advice to a Prophet. When you come, as you soon must, to the streets of our city, mad-eyed from stating the obvious, not proclaiming our fall, but begging us in God's name to have self-pity, spare us all word of the weapons, their force and range, the long numbers that rocket the mind. Our slow, unreckoning hearts will be left behind, unable to fear what is too strange. Nor shall you scare us with talk of the death of the race. How should we dream of this place without us? The sun mere fire, the leaves untroubled about us, a stone look on the stone's face. Speak of the world's own change. Though we cannot conceive of an undreamt thing, we know to our cost how the dreamt cloud crumbles, the vines are blackened by frost, how the view alters. We could believe if you told us so that the white-tailed deer will slip into perfect shade, grown perfectly shy. The lark avoid the reaches of our eye. The jack-pine lose its knuckled grip on the cold ledge, and every torrent burn as Xanthus once, its gliding trout stunned in a twinkling. What should we be without the dolphin's ark, the dove's return, these things in which we have seen ourselves and spoken? Ask us, prophet, how we shall call our natures forth when that live tongue is all dispelled, that glass obscured or broken, in which we have said the rose of our love and the clean horse of our courage, in which beheld the singing locust of the soul unshelled, and all we mean or wish to mean. Ask us whether with the worldless rose our hearts shall fail us. Come demanding whether there shall be lofty or long standing when the bronze annals of the oak tree close.
Well, I'm talking to Dick Wilbur last night that something like the atom bomb, someone who saw it fall, say, at Hiroshima, it's an almost impossible subject for poetry, that it's so good or so striking that anything to be done with it, you seem to have to take it into your personal life somehow.
Robert Lowell, born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1917, is regarded by many critics as the most important living American poet.
I want to read 3 poems about Maine and then 2 about New York, and there's some sort of progress in this group, though they're not a sequence. And, I think of the country as relaxing and easygoing and disciplined and hard, and but the poems don't differ in meaning so much. That the poem is called Water, and the setting is a small Maine town that's a commercial fishing village, not a tourist village, and it's a sort of love poem. The 2 people there in this town, visitors, sitting on a rock watching the water. And the water could stand both for sort of liberation, freedom, and something soothing, and for something dangerous, that the water's too cold to swim in. You'd die if you were in it for long. Those 2 things. And the poem started from an image that made no sense to me, that just came to me once as I was going to sleep, about an iris rotting and turning purple. And I held on to that, and I still don't quite know what it means in the poem, but it's one of the centers. Water. It was a Maine lobster town. Each morning, boatloads of hands pushed off for granite quarries on the islands and left dozens of bleak, white frame houses stuck like oyster shells on a hill of rock. And below us, the sea lapped the raw little matchstick mazes of a weir where the fish for bait were trapped. Remember? We sat on a slab of rock. From this distance in time, it seems the color of iris rotting and turning purpler, but it was only the usual gray rock, turning the usual green when drenched by the sea. The sea drenched the rock at our feet all day and kept tearing away flake after flake. One night you dreamed you were a mermaid clinging to a wharf pile and trying to pull off barnacles with your hands. We wished our 2 souls might return like gulls to the rock. In the end, the water was too cold for us. The 2nd poem also has a Maine setting. It's called Soft Wood, and I begin with an image of a seal that I think if you were to become anything else in the next life, it had to be an animal, it'd be a seal, that it adapts and seems to live without strain, that Freud could find no flaws in the seal. And I compare that to the scholar gypsy in Matthew Arnold's poem, who had no cares and went off with the gypsies and became immortal. But it's a poem about mortality. Soft Wood, for Harriet Winslow. Sometimes I've supposed seals must live as long as the scholar gypsy. Even in their barred pond at the zoo they are happy, and no sunflower turns more delicately to the sun without a wincing of the will. Here, too, in Maine, things bend to the wind forever. After 2 years away, one must get used to the painted soft wood staying bright and clean, to the air blasting an all-white wall whiter as it blows through curtain and screen, touched with salt and evergreen. The green juniper berry spills crystal-clear gin, and even the hot water in the bathtub is more than water, and rich with the scouring effervescence of something healing, the illimitable salt. Things last, but sometimes for days here only children seem fit to handle children, and there is no utility or inspiration in the wind smashing without direction. The fresh paint on the captain's houses hides softer wood. Their square riggers used to whiten the four corners of the globe, but it's no consolation to know the possessors seldom outlast the possessions once warped and mothered by their touch. Shed skin will never fit another wearer. Yet the seal pack will bark past my window, summer after summer. This is the season when our friends may and will die daily. Surely the lives of the old are briefer than the young. Harriet Winslow, who owned this house, was more to me than my mother. I think of you far off in Washington, breathing in the heat wave and air conditioning, knowing each drug that numbs alerts another nerve to pain. And the last main poem is more complicated. It's called The Flaw, and it began from a curious thing. I noticed there's some little defect in the pigment of the eye. You see a little dot, and it moves this way and that, and it seems to be outside the eye, though it's inside the eye. And I connected that with something I read about in physics, that there's some minute part of the atom that's undetermined. And that's supposed to console us. It's free will, and it changes the universe to know there's something undetermined. But it's a very poor man's consolation. And, well, the title, The Flaw, would be the flaw of something like an eye dot that would be decay and injury and mortality in the end. And then maybe the opposite, that the flaw in the universe is this little element of free will and sublimation that makes life glorious and a strain. And the poem is really, it's a love poem. It's a poem of marriage and dedicated to my wife, that it's what rubs off in two lives, what comes that makes them real. And once again, it's by the sea, and there's a seal. The Flaw. A seal swims like a poodle through the sheet of blinding salt. A country graveyard, here and there a rock, and here and there a pine, throbs on the essence of the gasoline. Some mote, some eye flaw wobbles in the heat, hair thin, hair dark, the fragment of a hair, a noose, a question. All is possible. If there's free will, it's something like this hair, inside my eye, outside my eye, yet free, airless as grace, if the good God. I see. Our bodies quiver. In this rustling air, all's possible, all's unpredictable. Old wives and husbands, look, their gravestones wait in couples with the names and half the date. One future and one freedom. In a flash, I see us whiten into skeletons, our eager, sharpened cries a pair of stones cutting like shark fins through the boundless wash. Two walking cobwebs, almost bodiless, crossed paths here once, kept house and lay in beds. Your fingertips once touched my fingertips and set us tingling through 1,000 threads. Poor pulsing fetch, champêtre. The summer slips between our fingers into nothingness. We too lean forward as the heat waves roll over our bodies, grown insensible, ready to dwindle off into the soul. Two motes, or eye flaws, the invisible, hope of the hopeless, launched and cast adrift on the great flaw that gives the final gift. Dear figure, curving like a question mark, how will you hear my answer in the dark? That thing you see in country graveyards sometimes, usually the husband has died first and his dates are there, 18-something, 19-something. Then you have the wife's birth date, then the 19 and 2 blanks left for her feeling of finality. This poem is called Fall 1961, and it was a period when the Cold War got quite hot, and there was a Berlin crisis, and there were peace marches in London, and Bertrand Russell was making statements, and if an airplane flew over your house in New York, you shuddered a little bit, and my friends all seemed rather obsessed with this subject, and finally you just felt you couldn't think about it anymore, and that life had to go on. And I begin my poem with an image of a sun on a grandfather clock moving, a sort of symbol of time, and then there's a moon image, and then the thing that I kept trying to work in, I had an image of a Baltimore oriole's nest, and the oriole itself visible swinging back and forth, and that seemed musical and nice to me, though the lines didn't mean much to anyone else, and I tried to work them in, and I think the poem begins with sort of fixed time, something mechanical, and like the manufacturing the atom bomb, and ends with an image of freedom and nature, but also possibility of sort of a nature where man no longer exists. And this is all in the setting of this room. Fall 1961, back and forth goes the talk of the orange, bland, ambassadorial face of the moon on the grandfather clock. All autumn, the chafe and jar of nuclear war. We have talked our extinction to death. I swim like a minnow behind my studio window. Our end drifts nearer. The moon lifts, radiant with terror. The state is a diver under a glass bell. A father's no shield for his child. We are crying like a lot of wild spiders, crying together without tears. I misread that. We're like a lot of wild spiders crying together, but without tears. Nature holds up a mirror. One swallow makes a summer. It's easy to tick off the minutes, but the clock can't stick. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. My one point of rest is the orange and black oriole's swinging nest. Those lines about the spider are curious. That my daughter, who was aged about 5, I think at the time, happened to be listening to a radio program, and Anton Webern's music came on, and I said, "This is music you won't like. It's difficult for grown-ups," and asked her what it sounded like, and she said, "It's like a lot of wild wolves through the woods walking." Then she said, "It's like wild ants, red ants," and then she said this amazing thing, that it's like a lot of wild spiders crying, but without tears. And that isn't her language. It just was some curious, something that hit on intuition. So I stole it from her. Now the last poem is called The Opposite House, and there used to be opposite us an old police stable that had been abandoned, and the windows were open and pigeons flew in and out, and it was a commonplace yellow brick rectilinear house, and You noticed it very little in the daytime, except this curious freedom of the pigeons that they were at home there. And it faced our bedroom, and at night the shades were usually drawn so one didn't see it. But one hot spring night, the shades were up and the window was open, and I looked out, and there was a kind of glow. Lights were on the house, and it suddenly seemed transformed and looked like something in Spain or in South America, Latin American culture. And well, Latin American culture is very close in this region with Puerto Ricans, and I'd been reading Hugh Thomas's History of the Spanish Civil War, and one of the terrifying things is that there were outbreaks on both sides. Then suddenly both sides were taking people out and sending them before firing squads, and this curious world of police and criminals and revolt and fascism and republicanism and so forth. The poem before is a picture of nuclear war. This is a sort of hallucinatory picture of Civil War terror. And I end it with the Spanish phrase, "Viva la muerte," which is what the Falangists, that was their war cry. And there's a great moment when one of the fascist Franco generals was speaking at Unamuno's University, and he'd lost an arm or a leg, this general. He was a wounded man, and he raised his arm and said, "Viva la muerte," and Unamuno said, "This is a disgraceful saying, and it goes against everything we believe in Spain, that we long live death is nihilism," and gave much better words than that, a very eloquent rebuff, and then he wasn't allowed to speak anymore. The opposite house. All day, the opposite house, an abandoned police stable, just an opposite house, is square enough. 6 floors, 6 windows to a floor, pigeons ganging through broken windows and cooing like gangs of children tooting empty bottles. Tonight, though, I see it shine in the azores of my open window. Its manly, old-fashioned lines are gorgeously rectilinear. It is like some firework to be fired at the end of the garden party, some Spanish casa, luminous with heraldry and murder, marooned in New York. A stringy policeman is crooked in the doorway, one hand on his revolver. He counts his bullets like beads. 2 on horseback sidle the crowd to the curb. A red light whirls on the roof of an armed car, plodding slower than a turtle. Deterrent terror, viva la muerte.
Robert Lowell's published works in poetry include Lord Weary's Castle, published by Harcourt Brace in 1946, and by the same publisher, The Mills of the Kavanaghs, 1951. Life Studies was published by Farrar, Straus, and Cudahy in 1959, and by the same publisher, Imitations in 1961, Phaedra, 1961, and For the Union Dead, 1964. This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.